Hey everybody, Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a quick comparison between the Sony Cyber-shot DSC-RX10 on the left and the Sony NEX-6 paired with the E-mount native SELP18200mm power zoom lens. So the NEX-6 on the right has really been my go-to now since launch, both in terms of body as well as the power zoom, because the power zoom really, in my opinion, does represent the best of both worlds. If you follow my channel, then you already know how happy I've been with that piece of glass. Granted, it is a $1,200 lens, but in terms of versatility and despite its size when compared to what that sort of zoom range in a full frame form factor would actually end up amounting to in a footprint, and its performance when paired with something like the NEX-6 or 7, it's just an unmatched pairing. Really a fantastic camera to travel with, something I enjoyed doing over the summer, and it was just great. And I really can't imagine the trip without it. At least that is until Sony released the RX10, and that's what today's comparison is all about, because one of the biggest questions about the $1,300 point-and-shoot RX10 Cyber-shot camera that is on the left-hand side is that it is, as I just mentioned, a point-and-shoot consumer camera, not an interchangeable lens based system, which now under Sony's new vision or consolidation of their digital imaging business is known as strictly alpha. So when you think alpha, think interchangeable lens. When you think Cyber-shot, think high-end RX. The balance of the Cyber-shot cameras make up all different price points for general consumers. Of course, the RX does appeal to enthusiasts, and that's where the line here between these two cameras really does start to blur because of price point as well as performance. Even though there are many purists out there that already aren't going to like this comparison because of the fact that you've got an APS-C size sensor in all of the NEX and soon to be Alpha 5000 and 6000 cameras, the future models that are rumored and soon to eventually launch, it's still, I have to say, very close when compared in performance to what the RX10 has with its, yes, relatively small 1-inch rear-lit illuminated sensor, but because it's got a Bion's X processor that's missing from the NEX-6. Of course, that's something that will be in the latest Alpha mirrorless APS-C camera, so keep that in mind. You don't have to get the NEX-6, but it is a great value, which is also something I'm going to address in today's video. The point is that this pairing over here on the left, just because of the quality of this piece of glass, this 25 to 200 millimeter Carl Zeiss f2.8 constant glass, it's really just fantastic. It's, in my opinion, one of the best lenses I've ever seen on a point-and-shoot camera, and many video-based enthusiasts would argue it's one of the best video lenses that you can get your hands on. Of course, everyone wishes there was a larger sensor in this body, but you have to keep in mind this is a fairly compact bridge-style camera. It offers a tremendous amount of manual controls, arguably more so than the current generation of NEX cameras. Even in the NEX-7, where you have tri-nav, you can make the argument that the RX10 has more physical control for the purist that really wants to have every control at their fingertips. You know, aperture, ISO, shutter speed, just the ability to tweak everything on the fly in full manual. In terms of the actual zoom, because that's what at least today's comparison is about, because you know, $1,300 is a heavy premium to pay for a 20 megapixel sensor that can be found in a $700 and now a $700, I should say. It used to be $750 camera, the RX100 Mark II. It's the exact same rear illuminated CMOS, XMOR-R CMOS sensor. So many would argue that they feel the RX10 is incredibly overpriced just for that reason. You're getting a sensor that can be had for far less money, but you don't get this feature set. You don't get the electronic viewfinder, which is an OLED-based viewfinder, not the same resolution as the NEX-6, but still quite competent. You also do not get this lens, and this lens really is what makes the RX10 special, beyond the overall build and handling. So let's talk about pricing. Again, $1,300 for the RX10. The NEX-6 is heavily discounted because it is at end of life at this point, and still a great mirrorless APS-C camera. In fact, in my opinion, it's the best buy on the market now, but that's not what today's video is about. The NEX-6 will run you $650 retail right now for body alone. You will see that go lower. It has been lower, and that is an incredible value. If you can pick this up for $650, $600, used, possibly less, this is one of the best cameras that money can buy. A big impediment, you're going to be dealing with menus that the RX10 doesn't have. Much more consumer-oriented menus, even though this is an interchangeable lens camera, and that's part of the redefining of Sony's imaging division as well, and their overall understanding, at least at the consumer level. They don't want confusion anymore, and it didn't make a lot of sense for cameras of this quality to have menu systems that look like they belonged in the Cyber-shot wing. So the NEX-6 at $650 is an incredible value both on the still and video side. This lens, on the other hand, obviously isn't for everyone. You're looking at a $1,200 lens that delivers an 18 to 200 millimeter power zoom. It'll be a little bit more of an impact on battery life. By the way, the RX10 kills the NEX-6 in battery life. But the whole point here is if you've done the math already, this is a far more expensive package on the right than we've got on the left. And in terms of actual competency, in low light, even though we've got a larger sensor here and a slower lens and a smaller sensor here and a faster lens, many people will argue that still the NEX has the advantage, because with that larger sensor, if you were actually to compare these apples for apples, it would make basically the lens we find here not truly f2.8 if put on the APS-C sensor, but more something around an f4.4. And if that is the case, then you can see why many people believe that this isn't the incredible value that it appears to be. But what I can tell you is that when it comes to the autofocus speed, the menu system, and the video capability, it trounces right now the NEX-6. The margin isn't incredible, but even when I pixel peep raw images, I'm not getting that much more detail out of the APS-C sensor. Yes, there's more to be had, and if you pair it with the Zeiss E-mount offerings, you're going to get much better results than you'll get with this zoom lens. Remember, the zoom lens is exactly that, a compromise. And if you're dealing with something like the NEX-7 or Sony's latest top-tier A6000, where you're going to get a 24 megapixel sensor that's been retuned, as well as now also rear illuminated, or excuse me, not rear illuminated, but in terms of retuned with the Bions is what I meant, X processor, as well as the new JPEG engine. And also it is bragging or boasting the fastest autofocus of any Sony mirrorless camera on the market. That includes, of course, the full-frame A7 and A7R. That's where I think you're going to see a significant difference in performance. But right now with the 6, that's one of the compromises of the incredibly low price point. Originally, this was a $900, I believe, body, if memory serves. But of course, I may be off, give or take. And that was a great value compared to the NEX-7, which was well over $1,000 in the kit form, $1,350, I believe, when it launched originally and was delayed because of the floods back in Thailand, which is where Sony has continued to harvest the NEX and now Alpha mirrorless brand. And it's great, folks. I mean, that's the good news here, is that you will get great versatility out of this, and you can throw other lenses on here. And that's why I think it's really not a matter of whether or not you're asking, can the RX10 replace the system? Because it can, if this zoom range, the 8.3 times lens, is really enough for you. But as I mentioned before, that real true comparison of the sensor and lens pairing, at least when it comes to what zoom options are available for NEX and now Alpha mirrorless APS-C cameras, you can't find a lens like this. You will not find a zoom lens that will outperform this. Even the latest E-mount zoom lens, that's the much less expensive power zoom lens and much more limited power zoom lens than this bulky 18 to 200, still will not match this Zeiss glass. Not because it can't match the actual speed, the aperture, but the T-Star coating here, that in itself, as well as, again, just the effort that Sony put into, and I'm not kidding when I say this or exaggerating, Sony does not pay me in any way, or quite frankly, have that much to do with me, folks. This is about designing the optics of a camera perfectly in a perfect harmony with the sensor that they have under the hood. And for all of those people, as I mentioned before, that argue that you're buying an overpriced, sensor from the RX100 Mark II, it's not a similar camera in any way. So I think that's a complete false comparison from every perspective. Yes, they share the same sensor, and that's it. They do not share the same body, the same manual control capability, the same focal range. This is a much more appropriate comparison, and this video is really all about the fact that the RX10 has started to make me wonder whether or not there is still really a place for the NEX, or now Alpha brand of APS-C mirrorless in my arsenal, now that we've got full frame cameras like the A7 and A7R, at least for me, and of course not for everyone else out there. I would rather carry around in the interchangeable lens camera system style something full frame, because the RX10 gets that close. In fact, in my experience, this camera is outperforming this in just about every way. And that's not just on the images and video. Video, as I mentioned before, kills it, even though this is a true video lens. The kit lens for the VG30, and again, on its own, $1,200, almost the price of the RX10. So, yes, you are getting a lower pixel count here, but a much larger sensor, much more versatility, a better viewfinder, twice the resolution, also OLED based. But when it comes to handling, which is something I haven't mentioned also, I think it's pretty obvious that this is as lopsided as things could be. And pre-RX10, this was a compromise I was very happy to make, because even though it was a compromise, you couldn't get something like this in this form factor. I mean, this is a very small piece of gear to deliver this much camera. And the zoom, I mean, having the ability to switch between that high, medium, and low, because obviously the current NEX cameras do not have an actual zoom toggle well, some did, the 3N, which has become very popular because of pricing, and that's a good reason, because it does have the exact same sensor we've got here in the NEX-6, but it does also benefit from slightly newer software, and that's where the RX10 really has some major upgrades over this camera. It's more about the software and optimization, and again, maturation with what Sony's been working with. This camera does have Wi-Fi, but it doesn't have NFC. It does have a swivel display, like all of the Sony cameras, and a fair range of motion for articulation, and it's definitely a nice feature that everyone seems to like. I was never in love with the OLED viewfinder being mounted here on the left side. It does have that sensor to detect. That's part of their Minolta properties from that Konica Minolta acquisition back in the day. And of course, you can switch the lens out of manual and power mode so that you can zoom on your own with the zoom ring here. But in terms of balance, it's pretty absurd. I mean, it's not a big deal, certainly much lighter than when I used to carry my A700 with an 18-250, and it gives me better performance than those old solutions would. But there are far more misses with this combo than the RX10. And as I mentioned before, when it comes to manual control, yes, you've got mode dial here dedicated at the top, and then customizable dial here, as well as function buttons and another dial here. There's definitely a good range of programmability, and the grip is solid. But I have to say that even with all of that, and the viewfinder, the built-in flash, which is a good thing, these are all things the RX10 has. So even though the RX10 doesn't have the range, the reach of this camera is inherently far more expensive than the RX10, and then in comes the RX10, which, yes, doesn't have all of that APS-C resolution goodness, but really does make up for it with this Zeiss glass. And I've said it over and over again in every piece of video that I've shot about this camera, and that's because it simply cannot be exaggerated. This Zeiss glass is fantastic, and it isn't always fantastic. The lens that I'm waiting on for the A7, the Zeiss FE lens, the full frame 24-70, has been getting very mixed reviews since it has made its way through Korea and Europe. But nonetheless, on here, it's really flawless both all the way wide as well as at its long end. And that's not something that can be said for a lot of pieces of glass, interchangeable lens or fixed. I mean, I've got the RX1, an incredible 35mm f2 lens, but the versatility here is just outstanding. And the control, the aperture ring, straight from the RX1 to this camera, not quite the same build quality, but still a nice balance of metallic and polycarbonate build here to give a very weighty feel. The lens assembly is heavy, but the handling far better balanced. I mean, look at that in the hand compared to what I was holding before with that hump. I mean, when this thing is flat on a table, it can sit. The same applies on tripods. When this thing gets onto a tripod, it can have an awkward mount. You also often have to wonder about the amount of flex it's putting on the E-mount itself. A lot of talk about shutter lag and heavier lenses. This isn't one of them because this is fairly compact. It just was big for E-mount when it was APS-C only. Now that things are full frame, we're in a completely another, different league. But, it does have all the same markings here. That multi-interface shoe for all of those accessories, it's here too. So if you want to add a variety of things, external microphone, XLR, any flash of choice, you can. Yes, the OLED viewfinder is lower res. It does share that exact same sensor. And I do prefer the center mounting as well. That's yet another reason I am apt these days to pick up the RX10 rather than the heavier, less well-balanced, and overall not as well-performing NEX pairing with the 18-200. And it's disappointing to say, but it's good news for those of you that aren't already invested in the NEX, or I should say E-mount system, who want that sort of flexibility. Again, this does not match the 11 times zoom that you get with the 18-200, nor does it match the sensor. I've said this over and over again because I don't want people to think these are like products in that sense. They aren't. But when it comes to, run and gun, pickup, travel photography, shooting, wanting everything in one package, which I think a lot of people try to accomplish in interchangeable, even though that shouldn't necessarily be the goal. In fact, most would say that's the opposite of the goal, of course, with interchangeable. The RX10 pulls it off in one package. Weather sealed, that's another big advantage it has over at least previous NEX cameras. I expect the A6000 and probably will have weather sealing, I would imagine, just because it is a top-tier flagship mirrorless APS-C. And that'll be another good comparison I plan on doing with this camera. I'm not so sure I'll still have the 18-200 glass because even though this doesn't have the reach, with clear image zoom, it gets very, very close. And because on auto, it tends to get exposures pretty much spot on compared to the NEX with the SELP 18-200, even my clear image crops are looking better in most cases. So for amateurs, enthusiasts to pros, this is the better camera, I have to say, despite what common sense and general photographic logic would determine based on sensor size and interchangeable lens capability. Again, this is just my personal opinion, obviously, and there are those of you out there who will continue to think that the RX10 is a mockery of photography at its $1,300 price point, even though it's one of the more competent video cameras that's a still camera first out of the box, which is really, really impressive. So again, this is a comparison that I had to bring forward because right now for me, this tipping over, unbalanced, Frankenstein hybrid that I've been using and enjoying since its inception seems like it's been replaced with a less expensive camera. And this is another thing I want to point out. Even though Sony's been consolidating their brands and trying to really redefine what consumers understand and associate with alpha as opposed to Cyber-shot cameras, I think there's just a whole lot more confusion here. If you've made it this far, well, this is where I give at least my insight on what's going on here. And wrong for Sony, because with all the innovation that they've got on the RX10, the fact that I can put these two side by side and compare them is not really a good thing. And much like the NEX-6, in my opinion, eroded a lot of the NEX-7 sales, and in fact is in part the reason that the NEX-6 and 7 have been merged now in the A6000, the Alpha 6000 offering, is because of that cannibalism that occurred with the NEX-6 when it launched for a substantially lower price and offered arguably better features and performance with native E-mount glass, because of the 7 really not being matched and optimized with high enough quality optics for that 24 megapixel sensor that I really did enjoy while using it. The RX10 here, it does the same thing the NEX-6 does in many ways for not all NEX and now A series APS-C owners, but for a lot of you out there, especially if Sony really believed that everyone wanted to look at consumer-based menus like we were dealing with in NEX models of days past. Now we've got clean pro-style menus in Cyber-shot cameras. Forget about, of course, the Alpha offerings, as well as NFC and, new niceties. Of course, I wish the Play Memories application store was here. Don't worry, I didn't leave that out. That is a big advantage to going with the interchangeable system, in my opinion. That's one of the biggest, other than the fact that you do have the option to throw a fortune of lenses now onto an NEX, basically an E-mount APS-C camera, because they've built an army of glass for it. Anyone who used to complain about cameras like the NEX-6 or its predecessors not having enough glass options, those days are over. But when it comes to what it will cost you, again, to deliver what the RX10 does at $1,300, and a price that will eventually become discounted, will inherently always be more with the interchangeable lens camera on the left, or any of its counterparts, the higher end or lower end models in the spectrum, both current as well as older and future for that matter. But that Play Memories application store does give you access to a whole host of different capabilities that you will not get with the RX10. That is noteworthy. Better battery life with the RX10. That's another thing I do want to point out, and that just is another nicety that comes with optimization, and the fact that it's not dealing with that APS-C sensor that maybe just isn't as well optimized overall as this camera is. And that's why for at least my use right now, I'm not missing the extra reach of this SELP18200, especially since, again, the RX10 does outdo the video performance of this lens paired with any NEX camera to date. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them, and of course, as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.